Morning, everyone. Welcome in. Hello, hello, hello. Hi, Daniel. Good morning. Hope you're having a good day. Hope everyone else is having a good day as well. Having a good weekend. It's almost Christmas if you guys celebrate that holiday, so I hope you're having a good time with family if you're spending it with them and everything like that. Other than that, though, this is episode dogs in Deadhouse Gates. So, just like initial impressions going into Chain of Dogs, you guys did say it was a slow start. Kind of was, kind of wasn't. Like we had like the fella scene parts with her crew in the Warren. That was pretty interesting. Like how they exited it. And then there was kind of like a lull in the middle, I would say. And then it picked back up towards the end with some like really crazy stuff. So a little in between on both of that, but overall pretty good, I would say. Um, Duker's parts were a lot more tolerable. Um, when it comes to this chapter because I feel like a majority of his parts were just battles in general. We didn't really have like too much of him doing nothing. That was kind of Callum's role in this section until the very end, to be honest. But it was interesting. I like this part. A good setup for the end of the book. I don't know if I see where everyone's going, but crazy things happen, and I'm excited to see what occurs in the final sub book of Deadhouse Gates. Um, we'll go ahead and jump into it though. Uh, Let me get my handy dandy notes over here and we'll go through it chapter by chapter, section by section, and cover what happened, and I'll give you my thoughts. So, first chapter of this subbook was chapter 11. Um, so for chapter 11, we had Culp um, entering his Minas Warren while they're in this like Elder Warren um, on the dead ship with the not skeletons, but like the undead bodies that are headless, rowing them. We're still on that ship and everything. Um, and so we learn a few things here. So Culp is trying to enter his Minas Warren so that he can see if there's a way for them to exit this area. And he's basically prepping to use his Warren, like I said, to transport everyone out of the area. Brick to prepare everyone because he doesn't know what exactly is going to happen when he does this. Like if there's going to be some type of like reaction, or if like any type of backlash. So Hebrew goes to warn everyone, and then and then when he's about to open the warren, he then notices like a giant undead dragon in the sky coming at them, out of nowhere basically. And I guess from what I understood, this undead dragon is like the sort of like the owner of the warren or the keeper of it, I guess. Um, and so it's patrolling the warren and it's going to different like spots where it senses like magic occurring, um, and things of that sort. So the dragon appears, and then this is where it gets a little more confusing after this because there's a little more chaos considering the events of the situation and everything happening. But the dragon appears. He's then forced to pursue his plan without thinking, so he opens his warren as well. Um, and he is also worried during this about entering his warren because if he uses his warren, then like it could bring injury to it like hastily, depending how much he uses and how quickly, from what I understand. Yeah. Culp calls it the unwelcome. Yep. The dragon. Um, and so he opens his warren, and then eventually, like when he's doing that, yeah, it's outraged by the presence of something. Okay, so we don't know exactly what it's outraged by. Eventually, he opens his warren, and then like the dragon comes at him basically, um, and it, from what I understand, it gets a hold of Culp, like grabs him. It's like levitating him in place and like torturing him, like sort of at the same moment, um, until like until basically collecting the events of like the other scene until the ship can like sort of come through, even though the ship catches on fire and everyone escapes, but it holds him up and like is like torturing him, and then eventually gets distracted by something else. We don't know what it gets distracted by, but then it like leaves the area in general and just ignores them. So that happens, and then so Culp's almost like dead after this whole situation, being taken by the dragon, held up, like tortured basically, and then being like thrown off the ship into through the warren, and he basically needs to heal up uh during this situation while everyone is like slipping through his open warren that he made. Um okay. No, Cope pulls them into the dragon's wake, and the dragon gives him power to heal the wound. Yeah, see, I didn't really understand this section um, with what was occurring, to be quite honest. Pulls him into the dragon's wake, and dragon gives him power to heal the wound. Okay. The wound in his warren or the Culp's wounds himself? Because, I don't know, from what it seemed like the dragon was more of an adversary when it comes to uh, this section here, just because the next upcoming viewpoint, which we have, is like Felicine's perspective of the whole situation. Um, which we'll go through as well, because it'll probably help explain everything if we go through both. The wound in the warren. Okay, okay. He's trying to heal the wound in the warren. Got it. Okay. Um, so going to Felicine's perspective, we get Felicine on the ship when the dragon's attacking, and it catches the ship on fire. And then despite her being like a jerk to Bowden, um, Bowden shields her from the flames and then carries her off the ship while it's burning. He also has like a resistance to at least the flames from this the unwelcome or this dragon. He has a resistance to his flames. We don't know why, or if it's like flames in general. Um, we know it's not flames in general because later he'll get burned, quite literally in the book. Um, and so they like he carries her off. They jump off the burning ship and escape the warren basically, and they end up in like sand because they're back in Rariku. Let's see, checking in on the chat. So Culp just asks the Ascendants for power, and the dragon gives it to him. Dragon leaves when other Ascendants start to help. Okay, so that's why the dragon showed up. Okay, that sort of makes sense. Still trying to compartmentalize it. Don't quite understand it, but I'll take your word for it on that one. But I feel like it's something I might need to go back and reread through. It's like the battles. I watched the YouTuber you guys mentioned, Passionless Grace, I think, or Graceless Passion, um, for the battle, and that actually really helped to explain like what happened in the previous battle. I don't know if he has one for the battle that occurred in this one. I assume he does. I'll have to double check that. I haven't watched it if he does. But that one was a little easier to understand. Um, but yeah, so basically Felicine and Bowden, they jump off the ship and they land on sand, and then the two of them are back in the real world, and then they then locate Hebrick and Culp in the desert, and they basically notice as well that um, Stormy, Truth, and all the other people, they're I guess they're dead or they're stuck in the warren. We don't really know. They could come back later at a point. They never really confirm it and show us a body, but it's kind of inferred like, oh, they're dead. They died on the ship when it was like burning to a crisp, but we don't really know at this point. Yeah. Okay. He has a battle for all of this book. Okay, that's good. I'll have to watch that after. But yeah, so we don't really know if Stormy or any of them or Truth survived at all. And then we cut back to Hebrick and what's his name? Hebrick and Culp, and then Felicine and Bowden. And basically, after they all meet back up with each other, they're basically all pissed off at each other. And Culp is like really pissed, and he's like, "Tell me what's going on between all of you. What's happening? Why are you all here? What's going on?" And this is where we actually get like Bowden's backstory, and Felicine like confesses who she is. So basically, um, it's revealed that Felicine, as we know, is a noble to Culp, and we learn Bowden is part of the Talon. This is like a group, an old covert group of dancers who, when Lacine was like rising up and everything, or at least supposed to be eliminated. We don't know if they're all alive or not, if anyone's left, if it's still running. Exactly, it's a very secretive thing at the moment, but Bowden is part of them. And basically, Tavor tasked Bowden to protect Felicine which is why he's doing what he does and follows her everywhere. And despite her being a total jerk to him all the time, she he will still help her. Um, so it explains his background with that and how I guess they said they only trust him in terms of his benefit, but his benefit is helping her because he's fulfilling his mission or duty as a claw. Let me see here. Oh, those guys follow the dragon on the ship. Okay, so that's where they get separated. We don't know if they're dead or not, but they followed the dragon, and we just don't really get a perspective from them again, so we don't know if they're alive at this point. At least the way it seems with like Felicine's perspective, it seemed like the ship burned up into a giant crisp, but I guess not. I suppose not. Um, but yeah, we learned over a group. He was basically tasked to protect them, and this like sort of affects Felicine in the sense where she's like she doesn't like this revelation because she can't hate Bowden fully anymore, and she also doesn't hate her sister anymore because yes, her sister sent her into the slave camps um, to get protected and everything, but she sent someone to protect her during this whole situation, so it like sort of weakens her vengeance against Tavor, and she doesn't like that because she's built her whole persona on vengeance and hate and all these negative emotions. Um, and like to the point where, uh, let me see here. Yeah, and this is the point where what's it called? And this is where she starts like sort of forgiving Bowden, but not really. And there's a really good quote on this section basically. So she sends Bowden away because she doesn't want him anymore. So she orders him to like leave and not be with them. So he goes away. And then he's talking to her about like, I try to protect you, I try to save you, I try to take you out of the mines quicker, but you can't help someone if they don't want to be helped, basically. Like he wanted to take her out, but she wouldn't let him take her out and be escaped because she was busy being on drugs and everything. Let me see this quote he sent here. What's my sister got to do with some secret sect of revivalists still clinging to the memory, the emperor, and dancer? Why not use Claw, unless she needed to work outside anyone else's knowledge? Which she basically did. Basically did. I don't know why she had to protect Felicine. I guess she did it. Oh yeah, it makes sense because she had to protect her image after what Perrin did, and so they're calling all the nobles in this section in the beginning of the book in the prologue, and she can't exclude her family because then there's like favoritism in the empire basically. So she has to show that there's no favoritism and that she's fully trusting and no longer who she was before, and she's the new um not the new what's it called adjunct um of this section. So she has to give up her past self, but she has to keep it in secret because she's not really doing it and she's leaving her protected. But yeah, and then Bowden, I really like the part where he's like, I couldn't help you because you didn't want to be helped, basically. And she sends him off. We know he comes back later by the end of this, but he goes off, and then right when he goes off, like the whirlwind starts coming through the area, and so they have to run for cover, and they go to these like caves that they see. Hebert, Culp, and Felicine. I like the little trio that they had there, and they go to these caves to get cover from the storm. Within that's the end of their section for a while, and then before we go back to them, um, we then cut to Fiddler, Ikram, and Mappo, and they're basically discussing Iskro Plus plan. Apparently, he wants to look for the Shayik's dead body, and then he wants to use Apsalar to like replace the Shayik or be reborn as a Shayik or possessed by her. We don't know exactly at this moment yet how of it. They're just theorizing at the moment. And so there's a few things we learn here. So we learn that's his like initial plan. We also learned that Pust is somewhat behind the convergence of all three things, and his job basically is to keep all the shapeshifters away from the gate or the gate of shadow, which is in his temple, I believe, and like keep them away so that they're in this like constant search for the path of hands. But like he's changing, Pust is the one that's changing the trails in the desert so they can't find where to go, basically. And so he's preventing them from actually using the gate. And then we also learn that Servant is, as far as we know, Apsalar's dad from the beginning. His arm has been regrown, and basically he was taken over by the Shadow when Apsalar was taken over by the Shadow, but Apsalar was used as a vessel and he was used as a servant. Um, and so Pust is using Servant to get Apsalar to follow this path and be reborn as a Shaikh so that she could be reunited with her dad. And in turn, Dancer Kotalin can um, use Apsalar as the new reborn Shaikh to basically have a rebellion against Lysine so that they can take back the throne for Amonis. Sort of. That's like the whole general idea. So she's going to be used against, it's going to be like her third possession. But she still has the old lady, Riga, in her, who's protecting her memories. So that's why she'll probably be fine after this possession because she has her conserving her memories and who she is at her core. So even when the possession leaves, she'll probably be fine. That's at least where I'm at with it. But that is the main thing going on with Apsalar and all them. And is there anything else we learned? Let me see. Oh yeah, there's a few other things that we learn as well in this section as for that. So Fiddler also at this point recognizes Ikarum, at least his name, and he knows it's related to a lot of like blood and genocide. And so this leads me to believe that like Mappo's mission for constantly distracting him and getting him off course and not letting him find his memories is because if he finds out who he is, he might resort back to being a genocidal like person and trying to kill people and being a tyrant and doing all these things. And so he's like in a constant cycle of keeping his amnesia running and keeping him away from his memories because he doesn't want him to become who he once was, basically. That's what I got out of this like area sorta. And then after we get all this information in this discussion that the three of them are having, a lamp goes out, and basically they're covered in shadow, which is more dangerous than in the dark because in the shadow, Pust can hear them since he's a priest of the shadow. Let me check in the chat. The sapper mentally shook his head. The Ikarum he was coming to know made those rumors seem ludicrous. The Jag was generous, compassionate. If horror still trailed in his wake, they must be ancient. Youth was the time of excess, after all. Yep. Yeah. So it's hard to believe, like, with how what we know of Ikarum, that he used to be genocidal and everything. I mean, it's just something written in the history, so we don't know like the accuracy, but I would assume if it's written in the histories, then it's probably pretty accurate with that. But that's what's going on with that. And then so after the lamp goes out, they basically all go to confront Pust at this point. Um, so Mappo and Fiddler are traveling. Like Ikarum stays back for a bit and he's like doing something else. And so Mappo and Fiddler travel together through the temple. Fiddler notices all the Bakaralas, the flying monkeys, have been worshiping Pust. This is pretty funny. They're worshiping like him like a god. And so like he'll throw rocks at them and then they'll like pick up the rocks and they'll like gather them up in a sack and give them to him every day so that they can have the rocks thrown at him. So everything he touches and does like in their vicinity they like see as like sacred. And so they're literally like collecting rocks to be thrown back at them and everything from him. And they're just like annoying the crap out of him, but which I find pretty funny since he's just like insufferable. Um, oh yeah, they also throw poop at him. Yeah, um, as well. And he's just like not for it. He just hates this. He's not having it. He's like not an animal person. But outside of his little what is it, his donkey, I think, um, that he has. But yeah. So let me see what else. Yeah, we also after we learn about that little monkey thing, the Bacaralas, we get confirmation of Mappo's intent, which is basically, like I mentioned before, to keep Ikram ignorant. And then eventually they hear Crocus shouting and they see him holding up Pust and like about to start punching him, which probably isn't a good idea because Pust could probably mess him up really bad if he wanted to. But Crocus is Crocus um, for that. And so This is where we learn of Puss's plan and how he's trying to use Apsalar. And Apsalar is in the room in this situation. Um, and so Fiddler breaks up the fight, and then Apsalar leaves the room, and Puss goes after her. She leaves the room because she's like refusing to do it. She's like, no, I'm not going to be taken over again, blah, blah, blah. But we know she's going to be convinced and she's going to leave the group later. So after refusing, they both leave the room. Ikram comes in. He reveals the secret about Servant that we mentioned earlier, where it is Apsalar's father, and he's been sent off towards the Shaik's body so that Apsalar could go on that path, basically, and get towards the Shaik. Um, oh, and then also, yeah, that's basically it. So the group then decides to leave, like, the temple, and when they're, like, gathering up all their stuff, this goes to the next section. They're gathering up all their stuff, and then they find out Apsalar left on her own to follow Servant, um, and find her dad, basically. And so Puss, like as we mentioned before, Puss is basically trying to make her a Shaik to be controlled by the shadow and be like a resistance towards Lucine. Oh, and then we also learned that so the group's plan now is to try to catch up with her to save her from this. Um, and basically, once more, we get like more confirmation of Mappo being there to interfere with his memories. And we learn Ikarum believes that Tremolor is the key to fixing his memories. And the group at the same time is also trying to access Tremolor for the Deadhouse so that they can travel between things, or that's the plan with Quickbend. So we got a lot of converging like points for this, and we'll see if there's like any conflict when they reach the Deadhouse with Ikarum and Mappo. That'll be interesting to see, especially since the next sub book is literally named Deadhouse Gates. Let me check that out. When you can't produce holy books, produce what you can, I suppose. Yeah, that's true with the monkeys throwing stuff at him. Mappo pulls a giant jawbone club from his bag of holding. Yes, I didn't mention it, but there is a bag of holding. Huge D&D reference. Basically, like the never-ending. If you're not familiar with D&D, bag of holding is like an item where you can store like multiple items in it, basically like infinite to a point. Into it, so you can just like pull them out whenever you need it. So there is a bag of holding mentioned, and he's like, in this universe at least, they usually go away after like a month or two, and he's like, his hasn't gone away, so they're unsure of why. And then Mappo, let me see this quote. Mappo grunted, a worrying thought. Why? The troll scowled. I had a sudden vision of Emperor Iscarel Pust. That would be something. Oh God, yeah, that would be. It's like the Mad King with Game of Thrones or something. If they had that. I don't think. Not the first scene of horror I witnessed, after all. Soldier learns to wear every kind of armor. So long as they stand the trade, work well enough. God, I don't think my sanity would survive. Peace. No, that would be interesting. But yeah, that's the end of their section, though. And they all go away. And they basically are on their chase now to find Apsalar. And she's on her chase for the Shaik. So it explains what's happening with them. We don't really come back to them for a while. After this point. And then we cut to the other dude who's just traveling for the whole portion of this, basically, Callum. So Callum and crew, they're traveling, they stumble upon an encampment with like mages and multiple things that they basically can't get through. It's like a whole army in front of them. And so when he's like looking at the encampment, he also notices as well there's like multiple like crucified Malazan bodies, including one boy who's like his eyes have literally been like burned out of his sockets, and he's like on the crucifix just like dying slowly. So it's not even like they're just killing people, they're torturing them as well when they're killing them. So it's just very cruel for that, which an assassin is always against, because they're about efficiency. When they kill, they just kill right away. They're not really into like the torturing thing, at least for the most part. They could probably do it if they wanted to, but I would assume an assassin is more into efficiency and they don't care for lingering life on if you plan to kill it. And basically, to get through, this is where, to get through this area, he remembers Quickbend gave him a magic stone. So the stone was imbued with magic, and he doesn't know what exactly the magic is, but basically items can be imbued, and people usually will imbue ordinary items because if you imbue like gems, people usually will steal the gems because they want gems, obviously. So they'll imbue like ordinary items that won't necessarily get stolen. So he just has a rock from Quickben that's been imbued with magic. And so when he uses the rock, it opens the Imperial Warren. And so him and the group decide to go through the Imperial Warren to get to Aaron instead of getting to Unta or anything else. This stone was originally meant to be used to get into the palace or some type of place to kill the scene, but he's going to have to use it to get into Aaron, basically. Um, Let me check the chat. Yeah, Callum has a stone. The magic user's with sense, so he can't sneak in. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then we totter on edges seen and unseen. We are reduced yet defiant. We've lost the meaning of time, endless motion broken only by its dulled absence, the shock of rest, and those horns sounding an end. To the days plodding for that moment as the dust swirls on, no one moves standing in disbelief that another day has passed, and yet we still live, or yet still we live. And so, yeah, so basically they're going into the Imperial Warren now to escape things. From what the Imperial Warren does or how it works in terms of transportation, we get a little more information on that. So it's about like visualization. So if the user or the person trying to transport can properly visualize the place they want to go to, then they will be able to get there, and they will get there just when they need to, basically. So they'll travel until a gate opens, and they also need to have clear thought and vision when they're doing it. Um, and so, in terms of the Imperial Warren as well, when we enter it, it's pretty like grim. Like the perspective of it, it's just literally like gray on gray on gray, with just ash and bone everywhere up to like their waist, and like ash and bone. It's like a sea basically of it. Just very depressing, grim, and dark, and no one really likes being there. Um, and so basically, him and the crew, they're heading out to Aaron now through this. Um, and then we get the next perspective of um, the person following Callum, Lostra Yiel. She's basically, she sees the Imperial Warren is still open. She's unsure if she should go through. And then a strange man called Pearl appears and convinces her to enter. And he is a claw as far as we know. I'm like checking this. I'm like, I didn't skip a chapter, did I? Let me double check this. Did it start with chapter 10 and I just didn't go over that? Or did we end with chapter 10? Let me check here. Oh no, chapter 10 was the last book. Okay. Because there's certain events that happen with Pearl that like link up with like one of the battles that occurs. So I was like, let me double check this. We ended with 10. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's what I thought. Got confused for a second because I was like, with the timeline. um, Makes sense now though. Yeah, so she unites with Pearl, and then they basically go into this warren and follow along. Then we cut to Apt, who enters the shadow with the crucified boy. So he enters the shadow warren with the crucified boy from the camp. And he also brings thousands of Malazan people with him as well. Apt basically makes a deal with Shadow Throne to revive the crucified boy. And he gives him the same like demon eyes he has. He has like sharpens his teeth. So now Apt has like a little like companion dude that just like sticks with him. And then we learn the other servants will become like part of the shadow, servants of the shadow. And Shadow Throne also confirms that Pust is basically trying to confuse people with the Path of Hand. So this is where we get like what Mappa was suspected for Pust is confirmed basically by Shadow Throne in this section. And we also learn that like Apt is like seen as like kind of a castaway in the shadow. So there's other like Aptorians, but they're more subservient. And Apt is like doing his own thing basically. And he does what he wants, as we see like throughout, and even making a deal with like Shadow Throne. to have this weird demon boy like revived and put upon him. And he kind of like drops off with Callum after this point, still with him, but not. He's just like, this is where like App kind of like goes on his own to do his own thing. It's interesting what happens with him though, with this little like demon boy. I wonder if that's going to be like a conduit for him speaking through the boy, if he needs to speak to anyone or anything like that. We don't know yet. But yeah, that's basically chapter 11. Good chapter. Like, good entry, good way to start it. We have like we learn about a lot of revelations in this chapter. When it comes to Bowden, when it comes to Pust, what he's trying to do, Apsalar, Shadow Throne, Dancer, Apt, like we learn about Pearl, we get introduced to them. So there's a lot of intrigue building up and a lot of like revelations from previous stuff that was mentioned to help explain stuff going forward. Apt was a former concubine. Okay. So I think Apt is female. Okay. Yeah, I have no clue. Just giant demon thing to me. So possible though. I'll just say Apt. With them. uh, so going on to chapter 12 though. So we catch up with Duker in this chapter, and he's been traveling with Coltane. Things are basically getting worse and worse, and he's just going around cataloging the day to day of all the soldiers and people and like the horrible conditions that they're in. We see that like children are dying every day. Some people are doing cannibalism. We have like dogs eating dead bodies and stuff like that. Like things are just pretty bad overall. Um, and so uh, during this like cataloging of all the conditions and horrible things happening, Captain Lowell talks to him and informs him of a mission he's basically been selected for. He then notices that List is on the brink of death, and he sends him to basically get water and tells Duker to rest up in this situation. So, because List is literally dehydrated and like gonna die. And so he sends him to get water, and Duker goes to sleep after like cataloging the conditions of the area and everything happening, what we're going through at the moment. We cut then to the next section, still with Duker, which is basically Duker, Lull, and Nil by a fire. So he's woken up and they're by fire and they're discussing the current state of things. They're still looking for the warlord, like the Semp warlord that we learn about. Oh, and we also get in the previous section like what Duker's mission. He's going to be assigned with Lull to look for the Semp warlord, or like some type of warlord. We don't really know the exact details. Let me check in with the chat. Children are dying. Lull nodded. That's a succinct summary of humankind, I'd say. Who needs tomes and volumes of history? Children are dying. The injustices of the world hide in those 3 words. Quote me, Duker, and your work's done. Yep. So that was when he was like telling Lowell, or Lowell was telling him basically like, yeah, you're coming with me on this thing, even though it's going to be dangerous. You're going with me. You don't have a choice. Coltane is telling you to go. So we know they're looking for like some type of like warlord, and a newer warlock that appears in this section when he's with Lowell and Nil informs the group about like the sappers, and the sappers this whole section are just like hidden. We don't really know much about them. They're just doing their own thing, but he's like informing them about the sappers, and then at the same moment he's informing them like a bunch of explosions go off in the distance, and things are happening. So right on cue basically. And then we also get some like thoughts and we get some like history behind Duker at the bottom of page 431. We learn a little bit about Kellenvid's past on this page. Let me see if I can pull it up. So yeah, at the bottom of 431, if you guys want to read that, we can. It's basically a section going over like why he chose Kellenvid to be the historian. So we'll just go through that real quick. Might as well. So it says, being pulled from the front lines had been the Emperor's reward for all those years ago. That and the various alchemies that kept me tottering on well past my prime. Gods, even the scars from the last horror have faded away. No one who's grown up amidst scrolls and books can write of the world, Kellenvid had told him once. Which is why I'm appointing you Imperial Historian, soldier. Um, so basically, he's saying like someone who comes from struggle or someone who comes from the front lines needs to catalog these things, not someone who's been had a blessed life or a safe, cozy life, studying and being a scholar and doing all these things. You need someone who has experienced these travesties of life to catalog what war is really like as a historian, and both the good and the bad. And so he, at this time, doesn't even know how to read and write. So we learn that he talked the elder, not talk the younger, talk the elder, um, teaches him to read and write, and basically talk the elder is not very good at it because he's always like not there, and so talk the younger takes up like that job and will fill in from time to time and basically becomes his teacher as well. So he has like a connection to talk because he taught him how to read and write to become a historian. Um, Let me see here. Probably the first time Erickson actually mentions the Fallen in the series. Sormo and Bolt have volunteered some names for the task. I shall dutifully record them in my list of the Fallen. Oh my god. List, yeah. I didn't even think about it with that quote, but the series is literally called Book of the Fallen. Oh. That, like, it's like giving me like a mini revelation in my head now that you're mentioning it. Because, like, since it's called Book of the Fallen, I'm just realizing, is it called Book of the Fallen because it's about like the historians cataloging this empire and war? We know it's about like them cataloging the empire and war, but now that we have the historian's perspective from Duker and that quote, that makes sense with it being called Book of the Fallen. Oh, I like that. Okay. When I read Kellenved's stuff, he always sounds like a crazy person in my head for some reason. That's like what Puss sounds like to me. Like, I always like my internal voice for Puss is always like a really insane like person like speaking. Um, oh, that makes sense. Book of the Fallen. I like that now. It's like more meaning because I'm like, where I never really thought about where that came from, but it makes sense now. But yeah. So, um, let me see here. Yeah, after we learn about his like past, um, the group, it cuts back to reality basically, and we stumble upon these like tunnels that they discovered that have been like ripped out through the whirlwind, and these tunnels um they're gonna have to go through so that they can find the warlord. And basically, I related to Duker really hard in this section because he has like claustrophobia and he's like insanely afraid of these tunnels, doesn't want to go through them. Um, Lowell literally is like forcing him by sword point to crawl through these tunnels, and I hated this section because the way not like because the way it was described, one of my like fears I sort of have like the what are like non-rationalized fears or phobias that you have that'll never really happen is like stuff with like cave divers. I don't know if you ever seen those cave diver videos where they're like crawling through like a tight space and they can't move. I hate that so much because I'm like slightly claustrophobic. Like I can be in confined spaces and I'm fine. If I can move my arms, I'm fine. But like if I get like wrapped up to where my arms can't move, I hate it. It's like that's like the type of claustrophobia I have is if I can't move my arms. So being in like this cave where you like can barely move and you're like crawling through and you don't know if when you go through the next section you're just going to be stuck or not is totally terrifying, which makes me not understand why cave divers do that kind of thing because they're literally like it's one of the most dangerous hobbies. Like people die like constantly doing cave diving. Caves get flooded, and he even talks about that. He's like, we can get flooded in here, like because there's water going on. And it's just I hated the way it was described in this section because it was so accurate to like my unrealized phobias that I have towards this like hobby of cave diving. I really hate it. um, yeah, yeah, true. Yeah, I hate those stories. I don't understand cave divers. Like I understand it, but then like I don't because I'm like it's such a terrifying hobby. They're just like asking to like die basically by going into those caves. So it's like ugh. It's just one of those things that makes my skin crawl because I have like slight claustrophobia. Um, but yeah, that happens, and basically, they end up getting on the other side of the tunnel. This is where like there was more confusion, but then it got kind of like cleared up afterwards. But he goes to the other side of the tunnel, and then they're looking at like a fire with multiple Tithansi and Sempk around. So there's two Tithansi warriors and then a Sempk. And basically, they don't know who the warlord is, but they decide to shoot, and they kill the two Tithansi. And then the Semp guy only takes like a quarrel in the shoulder, so he doesn't die. And they basically messed up because the Semp is the warlord and like the one that's like controlling magic, or he's like a type of warlock. He literally had like his nose, all orifices possible, like sewed up on his body so that like all the magic can just be like contained in his like vessel, I guess. Um, and so uh, this happens, and like Duker notices that like Nil goes unconscious all of a sudden, and then another like warlock next to him, his eyes then like burn out and like burst from his skull, and Duker is of course like scared because like what the hell is happening, and so he starts like dragging Neil back to like safety or trying to, and while Neil is like being dragged away, uh like Lol and his soldiers start to like attack the Semp god or warlock, whatever he is. And he basically um he's not being taken down. All the quarrels are like being ignored, and he keeps channeling through the Semp god, who they believed was dead, but we learn later it's like a remnant of like a limb or body part that's being used, sort of. Um, and eventually, like a woman marine shows up and helps Duker drag Neil towards like the camp, and then tells Duker to like cover her while he defends her, and so he has to like take up the sword. They're then attacked by three Tithansi, and Duker's able to kill one of them, and then he gets like stabbed in the butt, I think, at one point, from what I understand, and then he kills the second one, and then the third one is killed from a throwing knife. And then he looks at the throwing knife, and it's a claw throwing knife, and so like for some reason there's a claw member like going around this area. At first I was like, who's the claw member? What's all this stuff? And then like later with the Pearl chapters where they also encounter the Semk, I'm like, oh, maybe it was Pearl who's defending them, and is the woman marine Lostra Yil? I'm like, no, but it can't be Lostra Yil, so maybe it's just Pearl, or it could be another claw. We don't know. Wasn't 100% confirmed, but I think it's pretty sure Pearl's the claw. But then they continue dragging Neil, and then the woman and Duker arrive at the camp, and Lowell survives the encounter. He shows up as well, and he asks them about like the claw, and Lowell is unaware of like a claw being there at all, and he tells him to notify Coltane right away about like what he learned and what he saw. Let me see here. Yeah, some unseen claw kills some. Yeah, so the unseen claw. It's probably Pearl, I would guess. The only thing is like, and I guess later Apt kills the Sempik, so it'll be. I don't know if it ties like I don't know if the Marine is just like a random woman or if it's Lostra Io. I think it's just a random woman because she's there in the battle later, and Lostra has nothing to do with it. The female Marine is just a random woman since Lostra is a red blade, not a Marine. Okay, I didn't know if she was like in disguise, so it is just a random Marine. Okay, that makes sense because she's there in like the later battle in this section. So Duker then meets up with Coltane, and he tells Sormo what happened. And this is where we learn that the Semp God is dead, but basically his body parts still contain power. And we also learn that the mouths and hole of the Semp worshippers were sewn shut, and Duker reveals that there's water in the caves that he had to crawl through. So basically, they're able to harvest the water at least. So it's not a total loss in the situation because they can harvest the water, so they have more days of like rations. Um, and then we then cut to basically them collecting the water, um, and the Tithansi are watching them. And then Duker notices like a white goat in the distance. I don't have a quote, but I know there was something mentioned with like white goats in the beginning of the section. I couldn't remember what it was in relation to, if it was like one of the poems or not. But he does notice like a white goat in the distance randomly. Um, and that's the end of Duker's section for now, until he literally gets like a whole chapter basically dedicated to him later with a future battle. And then we go to Felicine, where Felicine, Hebrick, and Culp, they enter the cave. They're like super dehydrated. Hebrick basically is like going in and out of consciousness, and he also gets blinded during this, or it might have been while they were trying to escape. um, for that. And so Culp goes ahead and he's scouting the area and he finds like a quartz mine and like or like a cave of glass underneath an abandoned city. Pretty cool visuals, but to get to the city they have to climb like a 15-foot like piece of quartz basically. And so Felicine takes Culp's leather straps and starts to climb. And during this, Hebrick just sounds insane. He's like spouting facts about the Berry City, which are really like, I guess, memories that he gained from what I understand. So basically, from the time that he was, when he touched the hand in the desert or the finger, he gained memories from it, I think, or like past memories. So he got like past knowledge, and those are like coming to him now. So he's like spouting like things that seem like gibberish, but they're also like fact in the same sense um, of things. And so Felicing like starts climbing, um, and she gets stuck at a certain point. She needs help from Culp to get up, and so he goes to get Hebrick to stand on his shoulders, and then Hebrick basically is like, "I got you, fam," and he can fully use his mage hands now, and he literally just like puts his hands together. He's like, "Just trust me," and he like launches him up like to the point where he like flies way above where he needs to go, and then he like grabs a ledge and he helps Felicine up in the area. And let me pull it up. Page 449. He mentions like the finger. You might already put that quote in the chat. Let me see. 449. Yeah. Hand of Stone, the bastard's ravings. Let me see. It says the ex-priest straighten. Remember the hand of stone, the finger, the past is an alien world. Powers unimagined. To touch is to recall someone else's memories. Someone so unlike you in thought and senses that they beckon you into madness. Hand of Stone, the bastard's raving. So I thought that, yeah, going back to like that original Hand of Stone that we like saw that was like buried in the desert. That's sort of like where I see it coming from. Let's see. Ages unveiled. The holy desert Rariku was once an ochre sea. She stood in the wind, on the pride of a spire, and saw ancient fleets, ships of bane, sails of bleached hair, charging the crest to where the waters slipped beneath the sands of deserts to come. His is the chapter 12 epigraph. Okay, got it. Okay, so he did the chapter 12 one. But yeah, so like yeah, he's basically gaining like memories and they're making him go insane and like go mad from the memories from when he touched like the hand back in like the beginning of the book. So after he launches him up and Felicine and helps Felicine like get into the underground city, he'll go up himself and like climb up with his like mage hands. And so the basically the crew's like going through this underground city and looking at like everything going on, and then Felicine gets into a room where like there's statues of people laying on the ground. This was like sort of like a Pompeii situation where like all these like people were like calcified due to like something that happened. In this case, it seems like some type of convergence occurred in the city. This was really interesting. I love the visuals of this and like the intrigue and mystery of this whole like area in this section here. Like, despite people not liking Felicine or liking Felicine, the stuff that happens in her story is very interesting, and like I love the twist and like the magic involved. Where like Duker is like the war perspective, like Felicine is like, let's just like give you all the magic and like the craziness of the world. The chapter 11 one is, if you seek the crumble bones of the Tlani Mas, gather it into one hand, the sands of Rariku. Okay. His is the chapter, and then the chapter 12 one is the other one. Okay. That sort of helps with the understanding. But yeah, so they see the weird room in the ground. Colt basically thinks that it's some kind of like Warren did this. And some type of Warren like swept through this like city and did this to all the people. Really reminded me of Pompeii, basically, where like everyone gets petrified in place. Um, so Hebrick then comes in. He's being really weird with his memories once more and like saying crazy stuff. And then I guess, despite him being blind, he's like, I'll lead you all to the next area. He like knows from the past memories where he's at and what's going on. Um, so we continue on, and we get more lore from Hebrew, which seems like crazy, like rave lunatic stuff, but he's speaking like actual lore and memories. But the group doesn't necessarily know that, but they still kind of trust him. Um, and I was like, I even wrote, I'm like, I don't understand much of what they're talking about, but okay. So I'm like, they get to the like place sort of like an ancient point of convergence, like I mentioned before. So this Talani Moss, the divers, and the Soul Taken have all like converged at one point in this area, like the original convergence versus the convergence that like is leading towards now, I guess. And so I guess due to the past convergence, this is like what happened in this area from it. All those three groups trying to combine. Don't know exactly. Let me see here. The chapter 11 one. Oh, wait. There was more to making that climb than just muscle and bone, I feel. Emptied with nothing left in me to rebuild, Felicine. Oh yeah, I didn't even mention she gets like super injured from the climb. She's like literally bleeding like from climbing those crystals. And she's like can't even like climb the stairs anymore when they get into the city because she's so like drained of energy. So they continue through the city though after that section, and then they get to like a pool. Felicine drinks the water, and Hebrew basically tells her that it has a remnant of alchemies, and it benefits her. It will benefit her. He also points out that the fruits no longer, or they're still edible, but they're like I guess they're thousands of years old. They used to be like apples, I believe. But this is like a little of those like restoration stations you get in like a video game, where they get to like the pond of mana and they like heal up kind of thing. So she heals up, and I noticed from this point on as well, he mentions the fountain benefiting her, and it also like somewhat changes her character. So from this point on, she's no longer like quite as bloodthirsty as she was in the previous sections, and she's kind of like getting better when it comes to that. So when he says benefiting her, I think it also refers to that as well. When it comes to this fountain that we don't know what exactly it is. Yeah, Hebert raves about a daughter taking the path of soul taken, popular alternative to ascension, more earthly, older, more favored in the last days of the First Empire. Okay. He's not talking about Tattersell, though, is he? Because I know, going back to book one, they had Tattersell, like, what's it called? When she was being, like, reborn or taken, they're, like, saying that she was going to become a soul taken. And we learn later in this chapter that even though soul taken divers poison people, that's not how they become soul taken and divers, and they have to be born that way. That's what I think it's Hebrew or Cope says. So they have to be born as a diver or soul taken. So we know she's gonna be a shapeshifter, but like I think the way book one put it, I was like I thought soul taken were like more unique in the terms of like, oh, there's only like one or two of them in the world kind of thing. But I guess I don't know. Rariku makes them seem like they're more frequent, kind of thing. But it gives more context to Tattersall and understanding what's gonna happen with her. Because when they were talking about soul taken originally, I didn't think it was about being a shapeshifter per se. I know they mention it, but it's making more sense now versus it was in the first book. Yeah, the elders try to perform a ritual to create a new version of the old, which had become crumbled, weakened, and cancerous. Too many of the First Empire's young were being lost. Some were to the west. Okay, got it. Yeah, a lot of like lore in this section, but I'm all for it. Um, but yeah, that's basically it for their part there. Basically, getting to this pool in the underground city, getting a lot of lore, and learning more about stuff, and then healing up and having actual resources to survive off of. Uh, one second here, I'm gonna get some water. Okay, I'm back. So the next section is the Callum section. So Callum is continuing to go through the Warren, and he's basically confused on why it's taking so long, despite him like visualizing he knows where he wants to go, what alleyway, like a specific spot, but his thoughts are still distracted in this moment. And he basically, while they're going through the Warren, they stumble upon a pit, and the way they describe the pit, it's like just like bodies and bodies, like going down. I don't know, it's hard to describe. I can't really describe it back, but it's very ominous and creepy, and it's just giving bad vibes for this Warren. Um, and let me see. He also mentions at one point that um, they mentioned that like a lot of the Deck of Dragons readings were stopping after one card, the Obelisk. And of course, that card came up when he did his deck reading as well. But his was Obelisk and Ikarum were the ones, so that might come into play later. Let me see. Going back to Heberic, though. Heberic recognized that the undead dragon they followed was a soul taken from the Talani Moss Bonecaster that the group followed to escape the flooded warren. May have come in response to the soul taken diver seeking the path of hands. Okay. Oh, so that's what the dragon was. The Talani Moss. Okay. That makes more sense because I didn't understand it at all at first. And that's why they were trying to patch the wound because it was the Talani Moss. Got it. Okay. That makes sense. So yeah, the crew, um, basically they get up on that pit, they talk about the Deck of Dragons, then they keep traveling, through it, and they rest for a time. Before resting, we learn about Manala's past and how she basically was abused, and she was looking for an opportunity to kill her spouse because of this abuse, because he would literally like beat her to like the brink of death and then have healers heal her so that he could beat her the next day. Very brutal stuff. Horrible, and like I don't know how she can psychologically go through that kind of like thing, just being like beaten and healed all the time. And we learned this from the other man in the group. I think it's Caleb or Keneb. Um, I get their names mixed up. But the other guy in the group, the older one, he tells Callum of all this, and basically before the whole whirlwind happened, she was planning to do something anyway. So things, and he was about to like accuse her abuser and put him on trial basically before it all happened. But whirlwind occurred, and it was an opportunity for her to basically kill him. And so she killed the colonel when the uprising started because it was her opportunity to be free. Um, we then That's the end of that section, so we get that background, and then we cut to Fiddler and crew who are following Apsalar, and chasing her down, and they just talk about more about like the plans with Shaik and the Path of Hands, rebirth, and all that stuff we already went over. And then we cut to the next section where it's Lostra and Pearl. They're still stalking Callum until they sense someone stalking them, and so the person stalking them, I believe, is Apt. And so they then decide to leave the Warren. They leave and they end up where the Semp demon or the Semp god is. The guy that was fighting with like Duker and all them. And so they attack him, and they're not able to kill them. Like their attacks are ineffective, and they're just like scared because of this. And Apt then shows up with his like demon kid, literally like shoves his arm like through the dude and like kills him. And then uh there's like some type of remnant that they're talking about, like the demon kit, like they toss like a remnant to the side and they leave it, and they're like, don't touch that remnant. I'm wondering if it's like the body part of the Semp, that's like in the person's body, which is why they had to sew it up. I'm not sure if that's like the actual way that it works, but they talk about that and they leave. And like this is where we get to see little demon kid in action with Apt and our new little duo, that I'm all for. And that's basically the end of chapter 12. They're gonna go back um to what's it called, to searching for Callum. But the reason I don't know if like the claw member that was protecting Duker is Pearl is because like in this section, yes, they encounter the same person, but Pearl is still like present during this, so he's not necessarily protecting Duker like during their point of view at least. So I don't know if it's like combined afterwards, like the timeline of this. But then again, he's also unseen, so is it like a section where they're like in the real world, but they're not like in it fully to where only they can see it, but others can't? I don't know, because no one else notices Apt in like the killing of the Semp guy. So it's just a lot of confusion in terms of like timeline, when did this happen, kind of thing. Let me see. That's the end of chapter 12, though. Pretty interesting. The next, basically chapter is like dedicated to Duker. I think we only have two chapters left. 12. Yeah. Yeah, only 2 chapters left. Um, this is like the lead up to the battle, and the battle aftermath. Basically, get the whole cataloging from Duker, like we did earlier. This is one where I'll have to like go and watch like the YouTube battle to like understand it. But I was doing my reading last night, already pretty late, and I wanted some sleep before this morning, so I was like, no, I'm not gonna watch the video just yet because I want some extra sleep. Um, but yeah, let me see here. So basically, we cut to Duker's perspective, and some noble approaches him because he's mad about his like lapdog being stolen or being eaten. Because we see Duker was like mentioning he saw like a dog carrying like another thing in its like mouth. So we think that it might have been eaten, but he thinks it's been stolen. Duker's joking with him for a while about like the whole thing until the noble gets pissed off and wants to fight him. And then Corporal Liz shows up to escort Duker. And they basically leave, and Duker's already pissed off at nobles because of this encounter. They then stumble upon Lenestra, who's whipping a servant. Um, and so they stop him from whipping the servant. He basically said that the servant, what's it called? The servant, because the servant left to fight in the battle and didn't stay with them, he's being punished now, even though he shouldn't be punished. And he's literally whipping him to like a point of unconsciousness. And this is like just horrible, obviously. So Duker is like not having it at all. He literally goes up to him and he like threatens him, to the point where he's like scared shitless. And he's like not gonna be doing this. And so he takes the servant. He's like, "You're not getting this servant anymore." And so he basically just takes it away from him. And Nethpar like shows up and he's like, "You shouldn't do that. We'll remember these things. We remember everything," kind of thing. And he's like warning him, and it's like, bro, if you all die in a war, it doesn't matter what you remember. So stop being jerks, like you little annoying nobles. Get out of here. Um, Let me just cut back to what the chat's saying. You probably think Duker whispered that I'm about to tell you about the situation we're all in, but it's already quite evident that there'd be little point. Yeah, exactly. Like he's not gonna like tell them like what's going on. They already know that everything's horrible, but like they don't get it anyways. They're just a bunch of idiots. Um, but yeah, at the Nethpara and everything, Duker reminds him that he was a soldier before he was a scholar. That's what he reminded him, not of like he didn't remind him of the situation. He's like, I used to be a soldier before I was a scholar. Remember that. Get off my back. You can't push me around. They think he's just like a normal scholar that's like weak. He's like, no. He's like, I know how to fight. I'll freaking mess you up. That's basically what he like threatened them with. He then continues on, um, and he has like a weird moment with like the Marine woman. I guess he's like flirts with her, but he's like, oh, she's just being nice to me. She doesn't like me, but we know later in the battle she's pretty straightforward with him about what her intentions are. But after that moment, they then go to like the meeting sort of, and they arrive uh, and talk about like when Neil was unconscious, what happened. Um, he also saw Apt and the Demon Boy. Neil did, I believe. He saw them kill the Semp. And then after that, he tells Duker tells Colton about Bolt and the nobles, and how the servants should have not been returned to them. And so Colton buys all the servants, and he's like, I'll let the gold weigh down the nobles and not our soldiers, basically. And then they're like, how are you going to pay the soldiers? And he reminds them, he's like, the Empire always pays its debts, like the Lannisters. He's like, Lannisters always pay their debts. The Empire will pay their debts. But that was also like a two-sided one, because he's like, they always pay their debts, because he's still like kind of adversary. He doesn't like them fully, even though he works for the Empire. So he's like, I remember everything, and I'm gonna come after you at one point. That's kind of like the vibe I got from it. Yeah, Duker is somewhat used to situations like this. To fear the gods is to fear death. In places where men and women are dying, the gods no longer stand in the spaces between. The soothing intercession is gone. They've stepped back through the gates, and watch from the other side. Watch and wait. Yes. And so, we continue on, and Duker and Coltane have a conversation about the night before, what happened with the battle, with Relo and everything. And they sort of discuss like the plans and expectations going forward. And so Duker then talks to like after that meeting, he then talks to a horseman as well. So we get like the perspective of like his job as a historian, getting multiple perspectives and like talking to people, interviewing them to write them down in his like books and everything. Um, and so the historian or the horseman that he talks to is like equipping armor for like heavy cavalry, and then Duker is basically like, um, being like, yeah, it's not gonna work, bro. Like, why do you have that? And like, I guess the heavy cavalry armor is like from before the uprising, like way before, waiting to be used now, basically. So a lot of interesting stuff. He's just basically going through catalog and everything like a actual journalist in war would in modern day. Um, he eventually groups up with like all the captains and everything, and he finds out that the sappers are nowhere to be seen. They're off doing their own thing. And he's the group of captains he's with is Solmar, Chened, and Lowell. And then while they're discussing like the sappers and everything going on in the situation and how they don't know where the sappers are, a horn then rings, basically bringing everyone's waiting to an end because this is like the night before a battle. So we get the perspective of like the before a battle, moments before. Then we're gonna get the perspective of the battle, and then we get the aftermath afterwards. So we're gonna get the full spectrum of everything here. So the next section, Duker is going out into the battle. My notes probably aren't as well because, like we mentioned before, I'm not the best at tracking battles, but I sort of understood this one a little more than the past one. At least when the sapper showed up, it was easier to understand. So he's going into battle to witness everything. He also has an interesting quote on page 48 about like nameless deaths. I think I'll pull that up so we can just go through it if I can find my book wherever I put it. 488. Yeah, here it is. His thoughts felt fevered, spinning in irrational terror of knowledge, of the details that remind him of humanity. Names to faces are like twin serpents threatening the most painful bite of all. I'll never return to the list of the fallen, because I see now that the unnamed soldier is a gift. The named soldier, dead, melted wax, demands a response among the living, a response no one can make. Names are no comfort. They're a call to answer the unanswerable. Why did she die? Not him. Why did the survivors remain anonymous, as if cursed, while the dead are revered? Why do we cling to what we lose, while we ignore what we still hold? Name none of the fallen, for they stood in our place, and they stand there still in each moment of our lives. Let my death hold no glory, and let me die forgotten and unknown. Let it not be said that I was one among the dead to accuse the living. That's a deep part. And now that we have the context of like the Fallen that you mentioned earlier, I wasn't even like linking like the name of the series, Book of the Fallen, until we get to like this section here. And like what you mentioned earlier, I wasn't even thinking about it at the time when I was reading it, but now it just like hits even more now that I know like the significance of the name of the series, and then like the perspective of a historian, and basically that is what the series is, and that's telling it who it is. And I believe you guys said it comes from like his past experience of being a war veteran with Erickson. But yeah, you already got the quote I was reading. Probably among the best lines in the book. Yeah, that is it, knowing the full perspective of like the series, and also like where everything's going, and like what the job of the series is to catalog these like this empire, not necessarily like the individuals in it, but like the story of war. Basically, it just like brings more weight to it now that I like am relating it back to the name of the series, the Book of the Fallen. It's the list of all the dead, basically, from this like horrible war, from the Malazan Empire, everyone who died during it. And it's just really deep if you think about it. I really like that quote. Yeah, we go on though. And so Duker is marching. Basically, he's like with like the shields and everything, not like fully the front lines, but he's like in a shield formation. And they're marching out in the battle. They're under fire until like the arrows are coming down on them until like the Crow clan shows up and like cleans out a bunch of like the bowmen. The battle keeps ensuing. This is where I got like really confused, basically until like the sapper showed up. I'm like, what's going on here? List is supposed to be with him, and he's with him in the beginning, and then like he's no longer near Duker at the end of it. But then we also get like the woman marine from before is like sort of like following Duker and sticking near him. Um, they get onto some like ramp thing. So like this battle's going on, people are dying. He almost dies at one point. The woman saves him, and they get onto like some ramp at one point. I don't know if the ramp is like a ramp of bodies or like a ramp with bodies like scattered on it, or if it's just like a ramp of bodies. But they get on the ramp, and then like the sappers show up out of nowhere. They basically buried themselves in the desert like turtles, as they mentioned, and they're literally totally like turtles because they're wearing shields and like armor and helmets on their backs like they're turtles. And this was pretty creative. I like this aspect of like turtles in war. It's very interesting the way they used them. But the sappers like egg on the charge from like the cavalry, and the enemy cavalry comes charging. The sappers then set off their explosions and kill like a majority of Relislo's like army, basically. They still are getting charged from the cavalry. They had to sacrifice that to kill the rest of the army and like egg them on and bring them in. But then they like go in their turtle mode and they like dive like down in their shields and their helmets, and they basically get trampled by the cavalry. But due to their shields and helmets, they'll get injured still, but they're not going to fully die for it. So it's a really interesting use of battle tactics that I liked here. Very interesting. I like what he did with that. And then basically, um, let me see. I wrote down all these notes. We basically went through what happened. Oh yeah. At this point, Duker is like, he's with the woman. The woman's like, oh yeah, we'll have sex after this because like, of course, because they just almost died, and so they're just like, let's live our life. But Duker, she's like, he leaves her so he can go witness everything, the remainder of like the battle, what's occurring with everyone else. They do end up winning the battle, but then at one point he's like, yeah, it's a victory, but at what cost? Basically, he says. I think he had a quote about it too. Um, Let me check in the chat as well. Check into that chat. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the curse words are just things that gods don't. Oh wait, let me see. Oh, Hood's wet dream. Oh, so, yeah, that's the curse. Like Hood's breath. Neil and Nether still stood to either side of the lone mare. The light wind was ruffling the beast's mane and tail, but it did not otherwise move. A ripple of unseen chilled Duker. What have they done? This is more impactful when you consider Wiccans value their horses like family members. True. I didn't even think about that. And then let me get to page, I think it's 500, where we get like a certain quote. I think it's at the end of the section, I want to say. It's about like victory. I think he says something like, oh, it's a victory if you can consider it that, or something like that. Oh, yeah, here it is. Duker sank to his knees, suddenly overwhelmed, his emotions a cauldron of grief, anger, and horror. Speak not of victory this day. No, do not speak at all. He's basically saying, like, it's a victory, but at what cost? Like, for it. Oh, yeah, and then we also get the reference, like he pointed out in the chat here, about Chain of Dogs. We get, like, the full naming thing. Coltain's chain of dogs. He led, yet is led. He strained forward, yet is held back. He bares his fangs, yet what nips at his heels is not those he is sworn to protect. There's profundity in such names, don't you think? Yep. Really cool moments. I like Duker. Like, I didn't like Duker's section last time because he's just traveling the whole time. But the more we like stick with him, I really like his like insights when we get his actual thoughts, like in the italics. Those are like some of my favorite parts of his chapters because we get his like actual thoughts and his quotes and what he's like planning to write, and you see like the profoundness when it comes to stuff and like how he writes stuff. I like it, but I'm not explaining it very well, but I do like it. um, yeah. So after that battle, basically the next section that we get is basically Duker talking about all the losses and the bloodshed and everything that occurred in the battle and all the aftermath. And then that's the end of the Duker section, basically. So we get the before, during, and after the battle and what it would be like for someone to catalog all of that. Let me check back in with the chat real quick. There's a profundity to such names, don't you think? Life forces were powerful, almost beyond comprehension, and the sacrifice of one animal to gift close to 5,000 others with appalling strength and force of will was on the face it worthy and noble, if not for a dumb beast, its comprehension at its own destruction, beneath the loving hands of two heartbroken children. Yeah. and this is like the section like you mentioned with Nil and everything, what they did with the horses and like everything occurring, children dying, like the horrible aftermath and brutality of war basically is what this section is. We'll move on though to the next part, which will bring us to the end of the chapter here. So we get Callum, and he's finally doing something interesting, or we're finally getting something more interesting with Callum. So Callum and Croup, they're finally like they make it out of the Warren. He realized like he just needs to. Yes, he's visualizing, but he needs to just like let it happen. So he's like, "We're exiting now." He just like declares it, and it finally happens. And so they exit the Warren. They end up in the alleyway in a necropolis in Erin. Um, and then uh, also during this section, we also get thoughts that Callum was having about the bridge burners and Calor and Brood, where he's like, Calor is like this crazy tyrant who took over like things and armies and controlled so much, yet he's second to Brood. So how strong is Brood? And they're trying to make an alliance with the bridge burners. So he's just referring back to like things that are happening over in the other continent at the moment. Um, and then after that section, we then push forward a bit, and we're at the Squall Inn, where Callum basically buys everyone a bath, food, and drinks. And they're sitting in this like bar, and then he goes up to this patron basically to get news. And the guy basically is like a jerk to him until Callum threatens him. And we learn like the guy's name is Salk, or not Salkalon. We actually don't get the guy's name. Salkalon is a guy who hired this guy. And so after we get like the news and stuff, we learn that the patron is a ship captain, and he tells Callum of the news and of Salk Alon, who was a guy who hired him to take Callum to Unta. And he told the captain to basically come to this inn every day until Callum shows up. Um, and so this is how he ends up meeting Callum in the inn. And he didn't know how he knew what inn it was going to be, despite Callum like not knowing himself that he was going to be at this inn. Um, so it's just a lot of like divine intervention through this like Salk Elon guy, who Callum thinks may be Quickben, but he's not quite sure. In the later section, so after he gets that like confirmation from everything, he basically confirms with the guy. He's like, "Yeah, I'll go with you on the boat so we can escape and go to Unta," because basically all of Erin is a shit show now, and like as we learn later with Lostra. So Callum goes to Manala, and he's basically telling her that he's leaving, and she's not really pleased. She's pissed off, and she's like, "What about the children?" When really she's talking about herself, because it seems like she somewhat has feelings towards him, despite her like hate and like adversary and things that always clashing with him, and like the brief moments that we've had. So um, he like tells her that, and then he goes back to the captain. He's like, "Let's leave." And then he tells the captain, he's like, "You want to take off your disguise now?" We don't learn who the captain is, but we learn he has a disguise. I guess we'll learn probably next book who the captain actually is. Um, since we're on the topic with Manala, we see Manala like in the very last section before the end of the chapter. She goes to follow Callum, and she leaves the group because she's not really tied to them. Her sister is there in the group, and so are the children, but they're not her children, they're her sisters. So she leaves them because she basically, I think she kind of likes Callum and she wants to stick with him. So she's going to follow him, and they're going to join back up. And I guess that's going to be one of the romances, maybe. We'll see. Let me check in on the chat, though. Your friends in the back have asked for soap. I imagine they have. We got no soap. I've just realized that. Manala does throw a melon at his face, too. Yeah, you're right. She does throw a melon at his face. She's like pissed off at him at one point during that conversation, and just like straight up like chucks it at him. He doesn't react though, like to it necessarily. But I think yeah, she definitely has feelings for him. Yeah, with a squad healer, with gambling debts at your side, you can break bones before breakfast and have her ready for more come the next sunrise. Oh my god, sorry, messed that one up. But yeah, so we get that, and then the only other section we have before the end of the chapter is with Lostra and Pearl. So basically, they're in Erin as well, and they're tracking down Callum, and Pearl stays behind. She leaves Pearl, and she tells him to wait for him, and then she goes to the Malaz camp to like kind of get information. But then when she's there, she gets put into detention because apparently the Red Blades are being tried for treason. And I'm like, are they being tried for treason because they killed the Shaikh and caused the uprising? That's like what I'm kind of leading to. because they're like this uprising would have never happened if you didn't kill the Shaikh, so it's all the Red Blade's fault. So that's kind of like where it's at with that. I don't know if that's why they're being tried for treason yet, but we'll find out. It's not mentioned much, but Manala was a subject of a lot of abuse since that quote is about her husband. Yeah, like it was mentioned before, but we only really got it briefly in the section in the Warren where the guy's like telling Callum about like who Manala was. And so Callum obviously is gonna have some sympathy towards her based off her situation, but she's been through a lot, like from what you said and from what like we learn about her, basically getting beaten every day and then healed up to get beaten again. Like that's just a type of psychological and physical torture that you don't even want to go through. And then it's also someone that's a husband. So it's like, can you really trust someone going forward in a relationship after the abuse you've been through with that kind of thing? There's a lot of like factors that play into it if you're looking in real life and in the past and how that can affect relationships going forward. So it's something that's definitely important to talk about because it happens outside of like the healing part, but the constant like abuse, physical and mental. And so, like I mentioned before, with like Felicine, I like how Erickson brings in these dark topics because they are a reality of the world we live in. And even though a lot of people read fantasy for escapism, it's good to see these topics portrayed in something that's not in our real world as well, because it's something prevalent throughout humanity and is part of both the ugly part of humanity, and then in some cases, there's also beauty in humanity with things like hope. So it's good to get all perspectives. Let me get some more. Okay. On to the last chapter. We got a little short section here. Short but interesting. I always love like Felicine's parts, despite how people think of her as a character. Her sections are interesting. So, Felicine, Culp, and Hebrick, basically, they're still in the city. Culp says they must leave, and so because they're being hunted by divers and soul taken. So Hebrick then like spouts a bunch of like cryptic stuff, and Felicine says we should just stay and give up, basically. So she's not bloodthirsty anymore, but she still doesn't care about her life. So I mean, she's still messed up in some ways. Um, but basically, they end up like Culp is about to leave alone, and then Hebrick like comes back to sanity and and convinces Felicine to follow her, and Culp to follow him as well on the way out to get out of this like underground city. Let me see the quote here. Culp believes the whirlwind goddess ensured the year of Drina coincided with the shapeshifters converging on the path of hands to disturb the Warrens. Yeah, I mean, it all makes sense. So if you think about all the events, so we then cut forward. The crew is like leaving, and we see the elder deck being depicted. Like, so they come upon like this elder deck. It's not like the deck of dragons. It's like something that's depicting like ancient stuff and like histories. So it's not about like predictions necessarily. I didn't understand it fully, but after that like whole thing with the elder deck, they then reach the exit where Felicine, like I mentioned before, feels slightly changed and healed. She's not as like jerky about everything, and she's not quite as obnoxious. They then exit the overlook and they see like they're on a cliff face looking out at the desert and the whirlwind, and they're basically like, well, I guess we climbed up and what do we do now? We're on a literal cliff. We don't know what to do. And Hebrick's then like, I'll carry you both on my back with my magic mage hands. He's like super strength now. I don't know. And so really having no other choice, they're like, okay, fine, we'll go on this crazy guy's back down this like cliff. Yeah, the holds, which has also been brought up a decent amount in the Ikarum sections. Yeah. So they now that we're like leaving on his back, they make it down to the bottom of the cliff. The whole time they're being beaten up by like the whirlwind, and Felicine's skin is literally like being ripped apart. This isn't happening to Culp though, because he's like accessing his warren. But we find out later she's like, "Why didn't you open your warren to protect me as well?" And he's like, "I was trying to." So there's something going on where like it wasn't protecting her, or like the warren's not interfering with her properly. I wonder if it's the Atatarl dust from the mines or something like that. But that happens, and then Hebrick ends up grabbing like when they get to the bottom, he ends up grabbing both of them, and he runs directly into the whirlwind. And they're then greeted by like a person with a palanquin, being dragged by like multiple dead bodies, and very suspicious random figure that's like, oh, let me help you, I'll help you out, we're all safe here, everything's good. It's basically like a magic merchant who sells like magic ware from what we understand, but he's putting off this very safe persona, but he's very suspicious at the same time. Let me see here. Rariku reshapes all who come to it. This is one truth you can cling to. What you were falls away, and what you become is something different. Yep. He quotes that later. I like that part. Especially like in the end, when we find out what happens later. That's after Felicine crawls down the cliff. She thought she saw a figure, 50 arm spans above them. Then it was swallowed once more by the storm. Yeah, it was probably Bowden, like you said, because he'll come later to like help them out, and he's still following them. He still cares about. I don't know if cares, but he's still following his mission with Felicine. Okay, so yeah, we get introduced to the merchant who is Nawal Eber, and he has his like servant dudes. We learn like two of their names. We have Nub and Clam, and they're like undead people. They're not allowed to talk about their deaths, and he says it's because they're dreary and annoying, and they're too obsessed with death. But I have a different theory for that we'll get to in a later section. So basically, they accept healing from this Noel guy, and the healing works. It actually heals all of like Felicine's skins. I think it gets rid of her pox too, and he like starts talking about how like beautiful she is and everything. Um, and then he mentions that his wife died a year ago, and so I was like putting things together. I'm like, what if his wife is one of the dead people, and he like does that constantly to people? He'll like bring them in, reel them in, kill them, and then they become his servants. And basically, he's trying to do this with Felicine by like seducing her, sort of, and being nice and getting her into a comfortable state so that he can then kill her and become a servant. And that's who Clam and Nub are. They're one of the people that he like reeled in. And so, like, I don't know. And that's why they're not allowed to talk about their deaths, because their deaths are really at the hand of him. And so that's why he's forbid them from talking about their deaths. Not because it's dreary, because he doesn't want people to know, so he can keep reeling in other people. That was my weird theory. It's not really confirmed because of everything that happens, but that's what I thought about it at the time. um, for that. But yeah, this is happening, and Culp is like very suspicious. He has his warren open, and there's like a protective like dome around them. He's like, "Don't worry, I'll protect you from all the divers and soul taken that are literally trying to break into the dome like while they're there." And Culp like approaches at one point, and then he like turns his back, and this is where things go crazy. Like he then turns into a soul taken, or he is one, and he like transforms into like 100 like rats or like thousands of rats, and he like consumes Culp. Culp literally dies here like out of nowhere, like just random. I was like, whoa. That I was like not suspecting that at all. Literally, I put like WTF at the bottom of the page. He like gets eaten up by the rats, and then Hebert jumps in to try to save him, and then when he like moves the rats away, it's just blood, guts, and bones is all that remains of Culp. And then during this, like Hebert then gets injured, and Bowden shows up to save them. And so Felicine drags Hebert off while Bowden like fights off all these like divers and soul taken. And then when she's dragging him away, um, I was like, Bowden die here? Like I thought he died. I'm like, oh crap, he's gonna die. And then we learn in the next section he does die, but like not like in that area specifically. Let me see. That's right. This is Grillin who Ikarim scared off too, I think. Either that or they mentioned him to one of the other divers. Yeah, they mentioned one of the names for that. That Grillin, the rat one. Yeah, the 1,000 rats that he scared off. You're right. That is Grillin. But like the dude basically, he was a trap. He's like a lure. Remind me of those one, like those deep sea fish. The angler fish, is that what they're called? Where they have like the little lure, the light that they bring them in, and then when someone like bites on the light, they like eat them. That's basically what this guy is. Um, and so Felicine takes shelter, and she sees Hebert is just like in the fetal position, like grasping his face and like the folds in his face, and he's basically been poisoned by the divers and soul taken, and he like because what he mentioned before, like you don't turn into a diver and soul taken from being infected. You have to be born that way. So him being poisoned, it's not like he's gonna transform. So his body is fighting the Atatarl dust, Fenrir's blessing, the poison. He's just going through a lot, and he's also blind. He's going through a lot. And then during this, Bowden shows up, and Bowden is basically dead. Like he's no longer immune to the flames, as we learned before, where he thought he was immune to the flames from the Talani Moss, and his body's been burned off. It's been torn apart. You can literally see bone. His face is rotting. Like his nose and mouth aren't there. You can see like the bone, and it's just like gone. He's like a carcass walking. He approaches Felicine though, and he falls to the ground, and she like puts his head in between her thighs and everything. And there's a quote at the bottom of the section here on 529. Let me pull up the quote. I don't remember what it says, but I wrote it down. Um, Let me see here. Oh yeah, this is where Bowden's dying. We'll just read through it. Why not? You were wrong, she whispered, an image of armor within her suddenly cracking, fissures spreading, and beneath it, behind it, something was building. My vow, your vow. Your sister, Tavor, she. Don't. No, Bowden. Say nothing of her. He drew a ragged breath. You. Felicine waited, hoping the life would flee this husk, flee it now, before. You were not what I expected. Armor can hide anything until the moment it falls away. Even a child. Especially a child. Oh, that was deep. Like, even though she hates him, she still feels for him in this moment. And then, like, even, like, with everything going on, even that quote, like, behind all your armor, you're still a child, basically. Behind all your trauma, all this, like, this face you put up of, like, hating people and wanting to kill them and being obnoxious toward the world, it's your armor to protect you. But you're still just a child. It's really deep. Let me just read through the quotes that you mentioned here. Um, God's girl, would that I had your armor, and should I bleed within it, you see nothing, old man. No one shall see, no one shall know. This sets up later in a line in a way. Yeah, I think that's what we just went over. What is it? Hebert demanded in a hiss. This time I am truly blind. Who has come? No one. Oh yeah. Hide anything until the moment away. Even a child, especially a child. Yep. Like we mentioned before. It's just really dark, but I love it at the same time. It's such like it's very profound with it, and it's just such an encapsulation of her character and the arc that she's been on. And the armor is broken now with Bowden dead. There's no one she's trying to hide from, and she's not gonna necessarily be a child, but that was like what she was doing to survive in this moment. Um, yeah, and that's basically it for the chapter in that section. We do have a few more stuff, so we'll just go over that while we're at it. So the other group is still following Apsalar, but she's basically caught up with her father at this point. However, she's leaving a trail for them, and so they're like, "Oh, she must still like trust us somewhat because she is leaving a trail to track because she can't hide with her skills, or she wanted to." Um, so they don't fully know her intent or her plan. However, her influence they assume will protect them while they go throughout the whirlwind. Um, we then cut to the final section where we see Leomon and Tablaki, the guys that were with Shaik from before. They've basically been guarding her body in the tome this whole time. They're starving and they're watching the gates. And then from the gates shows up Apsalar and Servant, and she's being reborn into the Shaik's body. That's basically it for the final section there. I think so. Like it gets reiterated. Very simple final words that say everything. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. I'm still thinking about the Felicine section though. Like even though like the Apsalar stuff's like important to the story, I'm just like, it still hits with Bowden. I was hoping he would live, but we lost Culp and Bowden in like an instant. Brutal. Very, very brutal, but like it hit. And the quotes and everything that's mentioned is very well written. This is a really good section of the book. This sub book. And like you said, like, it starts a little slow and then really builds up, and like the implications at the end of this sub book really have me interested to what's going to happen in the final section here with Deadhouse Gates. We have like the conflict with Ikaram Mappo going to Apsalar and everything, and going to Tremolor. Is Ikram gonna find out his memories? Is he become like a murderer, a genocidal tyrant again, or is he gonna fall back and be who he is and still be compassionate? Is he gonna try to kill Mappo? Is there gonna be conflict in that? We have Duker and everyone going to Aaron, Callum escaping Aaron to go to Unta. We have Fiddler and everyone, like, everything's converging. Things are happening, and I'm excited for this final section. Really excited. Um, but yeah, that's basically it for this section here. Let me just pull up the schedule to see what chapter we're going to be reading through, because we are splitting up the final book. So let me pull that up real quick. Okay, so we are going to the end of chapter 21 next week. And then at the end of chapter 21, we'll then finish it the week after that. Let me see. Still like 40% of the book left too. I know. We have 2 big sections here left in the book. So we have 2 more weeks, and then we're going to finish this. Only 1 sub book left. We're going to split it up. We're going to go to chapter 21, which will bring us like, I don't know, like 150 pages forward, something like that. It doesn't say in the table of contents, and I don't feel like searching through. But we'll go there, and I'm excited for this final book. The like 40% of the book in the final sub book, after all these, like, I guess these first 3 are kind of set up if you think about it. So we'll see what happens. I honestly have no clue what's going to happen. I just know there's going to be a Deadhouse and gates, and that's it. And like, there's like, my only like kind of speculation is with Ikram and Mappo, some type of conflict if he gets his memories back, but I have no clue honestly what's going to occur, and I'm excited about that. Any last final thoughts or anything you guys wanted to ask about before we go for today? I think we basically covered most of it. With that, in terms of like, while you guys are like thinking up any questions, in terms of like favorite characters so far, like, I think I still like Felicine a lot, even though like I get why she's a hated character. I like her sections so much. So she's an avenue for all these interesting things. Like everyone in her sections, Bowden, Hebrick, they're all just like fascinating because it is. He's kind of like one note, but he did his job at the time. But those are like the most interesting sections for me, are like the Felicine, Bowden, Hebrick sections, which are just going to be Felicine and Hebrick at this point. Children have been an important part to most of these storylines, with Fiddler saving the girls, Felicine, children in the chain of dogs. Very true. Apton, the demon child, Fiddler saving children, Callum literally saving children, everyone saving children. Like, I wonder if that's also part of like a remnant of him being a veteran in war times, because when you think about like the Vietnam War and stuff like that, there's a lot of like children who are subjugated to war, and it's not their choice, but they have to deal with the ramifications of war and everything that occurs with it, all the atrocities that come with it. So it's just him showing that perspective of the children suffering most, or being the ones to suffer in war despite having no interest in it or no point in it, and their innocence, but they're still there to suffer through these atrocities. Yeah, Erickson was more inspired by veterans that him himself than him himself being a veteran. Got it. Okay. Like the author of Black Company. I haven't read Black Company yet, but I've heard good things about it. I'll have to get to it one day. But I have heard good things about Black Company. Okay. That makes sense though. But you can definitely see the inspirations. He definitely takes a lot of like real world problems and issues, and he brings them to light in his books. And he doesn't necessarily solve the issues, because in the real world, those type of issues never really get solved simply. He is bringing them, he's showing them, and he's displaying them. And I think that's more powerful than just simply fixing the issues necessarily, because that's not the reality we live in, where those issues get fixed right away. Sometimes they get fixed, but not always. And so I like how he does that. But yeah, good book club episode today. A lot of interesting parts, a lot of good stuff. I enjoyed talking about it all. Yeah, he even goes into stuff like economics and its effects on society in one of the books. Okay, so he's going to even talk about stuff like that. This one seems like the real big war book. And like, when you really think about it, Gardens of the Moon is like really like way more simple. There's not like as much of this stuff, and you can see how he evolved. I see why people say like Gardens of the Moon is like lower on the scale, because like of the things that occur in this book, it's like very heavy, all the morality issues and things that are brought up, versus Gardens of the Moon, you don't really deal with those morality things as much. But yeah, we'll go ahead and call it there. It was a good episode overall. Hope you guys have a good holiday if you do celebrate. If you don't, I still hope you have a good time anyways. Stay safe out there. Enjoy your time and everything. And I'll see you guys next week after we finish chapter 21. Other than that, though, thank you so much for watching, everyone. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye bye.